Chapter 23 Trial by Fire. Severe fatigue exerts a similar influence on the brain to drinking too much. Itzhak Fried. They had gone up and down the chamber for hours, months in the real world. At first, a path Ricky found seemed to go somewhere. It stretched upward. Then it became clear the passage was only part of a circuit. It curved up and back 3 times, came to an apex, then came right back down again, ending on the other side of the chamber with the transparent face that gave on the river. At the very top was a little lip over which the entirety of the space could be seen, including a wider vantage of the river beyond and the ships slowly floating into the massive structure. The area was rather like the empty space between studs inside a wall, only exaggerated to the size of a mountain, composed of unknown building materials and partially reflective. Toward the river was waning transparency, toward the back was opaque material, reminiscent of a seashell of silver. It was like being behind a one-way mirror and stuck in a vertical maze simultaneously. It had gotten to the point where they risked using the 45 and the 9mm on the door that had irised closed from the chamber below, then went and hid in upper levels. Nothing happened. The bullets didn't even make a dent, and none came to investigate the sound. That seemed like the most likely outcome of such a stunt. If there was a door in, there must be a door out. The chamber couldn't just go nowhere, could it? Why would there be stairs below? There must be something they were missing. Even so, they couldn't figure it out, and had come to the conclusion they were trapped. So the thinking of Ethan, Ricky, Carl, and Ed was now this. They were going to have to cause enough of a ruckus to demand the attention of whoever presided over this facility. This they tried to do many ways, but to no avail. They began going over every inch of wall, knocking on it, charging the sonic guns and blasting at it. Preserving ammunition on the projectile firearms became clearly necessary after half a dozen rounds were expended without any outcome. Carl had resorted to sitting cross-legged in front of the rip in space and time he knew gave on the real world, hoping against hope the cat would come through. Eventually, Ethan said, "Ed, how long have we been in here?" Ed looked at his watch and exhaled defeatedly. 12 hours. Ethan nodded. He was laying on the uniform, featureless alien floor, looking at the mother-of-pearl ceiling curved with no seam to describe its method of construction. "So you've been here a year. I've been here almost 2, but it feels like a day. To Chloe, her real name is Claire, it'll only be like a day." "Genevieve has been here about 22 days, Carl said from somewhere above. Voices echoed here. I hope they haven't implanted her yet." For Ricky and Ed, the fear had been there, always present, tickling at their brains, keeping them on edge, yet a silent partner in their imprisonment, not one making exceptional noise. Suddenly it got a lot stronger. Ricky stood up, as did Clever Ed. "You hear that?" "What?" Carl yelled from above. "Fam, there's something, a thrumming." Ethan was looking at the floor. A great shadow suddenly appeared behind them. Ethan turned and saw one of the cylinders directly beyond the transparency, hovering only a few feet over the peroxide river. Suddenly, said transparency began to glow. It was purple, it was blue, it was green. "Carl, I think they see us," Ethan said. "Get up here." Ethan, Ricky, and Clever Ed complied, running up the sloping pathways to the top of the chamber and in the nick of time. Part of the transparency made a crackling sound like ice cubes being broken from a tray, and an arc the size of a train tunnel separated from it, then opened in like a door. So, there was another way into this space. It's a moot point now. Coming through the new door opened by the cylinder were dozens of greys, walking in rows of 3, and bracketed by black-eyed grinners at the front and back. "Took them long enough," Carl observed. The other 3 continued to the top of the room. They all got on their bellies, staring down from the lip at the top of the corkscrew that offered a bird's-eye view. Ethan said, "The greys are nothing. It's the people with the black eyes you gotta worry about." "I know," said Carl. Ricky and Clever Ed were totally silent, and it could be easily seen that both had begun to tremble. They had their guns available, but had paled in terror. They seemed powerless to resist. Carl said, "That's our way out. We've got to burn through them like chaff and take the ship." "I can't do it." Clever Ed said. Sure you can. Think about Jesus. Ricky. Ricky looked at him and shook his head. Carl turned to Ethan. Ethan swallowed, said, I've done him before, fam. I got you. Stay up here, you two. Ethan. Yeah. And they ran down toward the creatures. Carl bellowed, Begone, by Christ! And began shooting. The grays popped like balloons and became a cloud of green, which came at Carl right away, then shot back around him and headed up the path to where Ed and Ricky were. When they had passed him, he realized the intent. Ethan! Pray over Ed and Ricky. Don't let them be taken. Oh, man. Ethan about-faced and ran to do what he could. Carl turned back, leaned out, took in the situation, and then leaned back to cover. 4 grinners. He wasn't a great shot, but he winged 2, and the others turned to run back in the ship. They had their own weapons, but perhaps hadn't expected an assault from a higher position. Carl screamed and leaped out from cover, coming for them, stomping over gooey gray suits, melting into the atmosphere as he went. Ethan made it to the top of the intersecting pathways in time to see the slime begin to rest on top of Ricky and Ed like some emerald swarm of microscopic bees. There was even a buzz, though it was high-pitched and tended to scramble the mind. Both men were being lifted from the ground, their arms out behind, their mouths open, eyes wide, and green streaming into them like jade cyclones. Stop! Ethan yelled. To his surprise, the slime actually halted, but Ed and Ricky continued to float in the air, suspended in the jade miasma. Ethan didn't know what to do. In fact, he wasn't sure what he had expected. But somehow he had the attention of the demons in green. After a moment, taken in the scene, he said, no cap! Jesus says no! Knock that shit out! And he fired the sound gun he held once at the ceiling for emphasis. The green pulled away from Ed and Ricky, but they were still floating, and behind them, eyes open in a half-dead way, mouths slack. Carl, what do I do? Ethan yelled. Carl was grunting and fighting below. He couldn't answer. Ethan swallowed. Get out of here! You're not wanted here! Go on! Shoo! In Jesus' name! The goo moved further away but didn't disappear. What's going on here? Ethan wondered. He looked up at the sky in a psychologically instinctive way, wondering what God wanted him to do. Then he vocalized it. God, what do I do? A thought came to him that there was an anchor point for the demonic energy, a point within Ricky and within Clever Ed. Ethan fell to his knees, put the gun on the side, and said, God, listen, fam, I don't know how this works. I'm like, but you know what's in my brain like, right? So you know what's in their brains, right? No cap, fam. These cats is good cats. They just don't know what's up. The Indian dude is like one of those pagan types. The old dude is like a curmudgeon. God, but like they're good guys. God, speak to them. What's in their brain? Pull out whatever lets the slime grab up in their brain. Ricky started to twitch first, to Ethan's surprise. His eyes cleared up for a second. Help! You gotta call Jesus, fam. That's all I know. Ethan could feel himself starting to sweat. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus! Ricky yelled and fell. Apparently he meant it. In fact, there was a very bright flash, and a blind gold light was amidst them that chased away the green like a strong west wind. It was Ricky's protector, Ricky's angel. It said, Ricky, call me Parameshwara de Rakavala. You will see me little. You will live. You have a destiny in your birthlands. It will come to you. For Ed, if you want your friend to live, you must pray. And the golden one flat disappeared. What was that? Ricky said. Your angel, Parameshwara de Rakavala? You said it. Protector of God, Ricky breathed. Yeah, fam, they got names like that. Now, what do we do about him? The green around Clever Ed was twice as thick, and now there was a high-pitched screeching sound. His eyes got darker and darker, and his mustache started to twitch. A bass noise began to come from his mouth in counterpoint to the screeching. Laying on of hands, said a voice in Ethan's head. Ethan felt the fear now, despite the fact he knew he should have been immune. The green had become blinding. He swallowed and moved forward, and he touched Ed on the forehead through the miasma, said, Come on, Jesus, he's trying, ain't he? Ricky followed Ethan's example and put his hands on Ed's shoulders, yelling, God, Jesus, he is an idiot, not a bastard. Clever Ed started to laugh, and it was a laugh that sounded deeper than Ed's regular voice. Then the man's body began to shake, and now it was beginning to hover even higher over the ground. Ricky jumped over him, trying to hold him down. Abruptly, The green was gone, and Ed came crashing to the floor, banging his head on the strange substance that made up the base of that top space and letting loose a very clear conglomeration of expletives, then coming awake, sitting up, holding his head. What? What? Another bright golden flash came from nowhere. This time the angel held Ed by the face, laughed right at him, actually slapped him, and said in a surprisingly thick Irish dialect, "Fella, call me Dame Screwdithier." "Well, that's a fair point, ain't it?" said Ed. "It's a surprise to see you again. I thought I would never see the day," replied Dame Screwdithier with a chuckle, and disappeared. Ed blinked through his orange glasses, mumbled, "Gaelic? God Examiner? The Academy is hiring weird professors these days." And he passed out. Carl came running up the ramp. "I think we have obtained the use of his cylinder. Is he dead?" "Unconscious," Ricky said. "All right. I'll help. Let's get him into the cylinder." Between the three, they managed to get Ed down the sloping path to the cylinder, which hovered outside the transparency. When they walked in, gravity polarity shifted and everybody fell left, which was the back end of the cylinder, its bottom. "The hell was that?" Ricky said. Ethan spoke up. "The gravity is different in these things for some reason." "Is that what you saw before?" Carl took a moment to regain his feet. "It is indeed. You still remember how to fly one of these?" "We have to go up the stairs to the top, and there's a cushion or something, like it sucks onto you, and your brain is the steering wheel. No cap." "Okay, we must make up Ed. He's too heavy. It's a long way to the top." At length they managed it, then as a group made their way up the central spiral stairway to the top of the vessel. At its apex, or its front, was a silvered cushion that sat atop a cube over the stairs under another transparent dome. Ricky said to clever Ed, "I never heard you say anything about Jesus." "I always believed. It's... Life throws you curveballs. I'll tell you about it sometime. What is this place?" Ricky did something with his eyebrows and only managed to say, "Yeah." Ethan said, "Stay by my hands when I lay down on the top of this thing, like this cushion, like it sucks you in. This ship will eat you. Grab me if I start falling all the way in, all right?" They obliged, Ed on one side, Carl on the other. Ricky had his weapon aimed at the space under the platform where was the cushion, watching for enemies. The layout of this vessel was just the same as the one Ethan had been in earlier. Ethan got atop the cushion, laid out, concentrated. Nothing happened. The cylinder continued to rest where it was. Carl said, "What do you do, Ethan? I've never been in one of these." "I don't know, fam. Before I just jumped on the cushion and I could, Ethan began to grit his teeth, and the material of the cushion, that strange silvery non-Newtonian fluid, began to separate, drawing him into it. Abruptly, the vessel began to make its deep thrumming noise and started moving. The roof was the windshield, as it were. It felt like they were taking off at an angle into the sky, though they were horizontally oriented, not vertically oriented. All four men could see they had begun to travel. The cylinder pulled up, out, and over the river of hydrogen peroxide, then began to raise itself, then became part of a line of other cylinders and shapes being drawn slowly into the mirrored domain of the conch ziggurat. It was like a sea of indigo as the twilight from the dawn, forever waiting to break, reflected through the mirrored chamber from behind. It was indeed mirrored. Looking out through the dome viewport that was the front of the craft, they could see their ship reflected infinitely in either direction. It was not a perfect cylinder, but oblong and rounded at the ends. It had a metallic look, but was segmented, as Ethan and Carl remembered. It was shorter than the other cylinder had been, and slightly fat in the middle. It had a dark brownish color with reflective mirrored highlights, and appeared quite solid. Looking down the length of the cylinder in the mirrors, Ethan suddenly said, "I don't see where we came in. Can you see where we came in, anybody?" Cleverhead squinted, craning his neck. No, I don't, but keep doing what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything anymore," said Ethan. "It's like it's on autopilot." "Look!" Carl was pointing at the ceiling. There was a shelf alongside one portion of the curved and mirrored plane, defining the structure's interior wall. Said shelf was several 100 feet above the spiraling circuit through which the cylinders and other shapes traveled into the conch ziggurat. Unless you looked at precise points, you couldn't see it. There was what looked like a little brown tumor on the lip. Carl said, "That is the yeast cache." Ricky squinted. "But don't you need soap as well for a big reaction?" Well, yes and no. The soap makes a sort of foam that's hot and thick, but the yeast will force the peroxide into gas and water, and it will kick up a big cloud. Now, not quite how I wanted, but Ethan, can you crash into it? Ethan grunted and strained. He sank further into the cushion, almost submerging, then took a great breath and said, I can't make it do anything. Carl had another idea. What about the shift like the cats back to our world? Can you shift it like before? Ethan's eyes widened and he had the thought. Now this action did have an effect, though it was not the intended one. Through the portal at the top, the entire ship could be seen to glow. A deep, deep thrumming sound reached a fever pitch, and abruptly the cylinder broke from the line it was following like cars through a car wash and careened into the inside mirror of the spiraling structure. It punched through the transparency like paper and produced a cloud of pulverized reflective matter, followed by a cacophony of extraordinarily deep and reverberating noises. There was shaking, and the line of geometric shapes floating in formation into the into the conch ziggurat, abruptly halted all forward momentum, hovering where they were in the air. Meanwhile, there was a wave of green indicating quite a few spiritual interlopers were knocked out of their gray flesh suits. It was like ripping aside a portion of a beehive or a termite colony and spraying it with fire. Initially, the inhabitants began running and darting and going to and fro quite discomfited. Those that didn't get out of the way of the cylinder got knocked from their cheap embodiment. The cylinder continued to shake and flicker, fully absorbed into the honeycombed interior of the ziggurat behind the mirror. It was quite a mirror, making 1.5 turns to the center of the ziggurat before whatever happened that sent energy high into the heavens. If there were 100 units defining full power from light refracting between mirrored planes in the Cozy Rev Conch ziggurat, the destruction wrought by the cylinder may have extracted perhaps 3 units from the whole. It was enough to impede regular operations, maybe, but not enough to totally impact the totality of the structure. Within the cylinder, Ethan, Ricky, Ed, and Carl experienced stillness, a brief instant. Then, with abruptness, the entire conveyance shook. An indigo glow that had defined the space inside the vessel totally disappeared, as did the vista from the front or top of the bridge of the craft. Now they were in darkness, but there was another episode of trembling, and a collection of blue sparks made laps around the vessel, inside and out. From without, the cylinder that had crashed into the interior mirror could be seen to desegment electrically, each individual component like a fat disc hovering out from the rest, spine bones of a massive snake without skin coming apart in the air. A different light bled in from the open face of the cube under the cushion, a bluish-purple light that was like the general twilight of the world between worlds. Whatever caused the non-Newtonian fluid to suck Ethan in, that technological force disappeared. Now Ethan was recessed within the material, but it wasn't liquid. It had solidified, and though he was almost covered by it, he could pull himself out. It crumbled, but Ethan quickly realized this was not his wisest move as he started to fall to the side of the vessel where Carl, Ed, and Ricky were recovering from the jolt. Ethan managed to grab an edge tenuously and swing his leg through the open plane of the cube to the stairs. Thankfully, the polarity of gravitational force hadn't altered a full 90 degrees. There was a mild slope to the floor, now the back wall, of the bridge. Ethan, are you alive up there? Asked Carl. Yeah, see me? I'm in the spot where we came in. Yeah, I see you. What is going on? Clever Ed wondered. I don't know, sir. I think we broke it, answered Ricky. We broke it all right, said Carl, and we should move quick. They all pulled themselves into the open face of the cube beneath the cushion. Using the rail like a footrest, they managed to inch themselves down the sideways stair. One segment of spine under the head of the cylinder remained, and without any sort of impelling force, half the fleshy, sheet-like openings acting as the doors on the rooms circling the stair were open. Seeing them, Ethan had a flashback. He knew inside each were men locked into the madness of the abduction machine. Ricky got a surprise. He didn't know what he was about to see. Incidentally, he looked into one of those rooms with its metallic draped doors hanging open and saw a half-formed gray growing like mold from an inert man. It was a fungus. It was a tumor. It was grotesque. But it looked like a threat. Ricky fired several times from his sonic weapon in rapid succession. He hit his target, but a burst of green didn't greet him. Rather, the flesh suit exploded in a white conglomeration of goop like what you might see inside a tissue after a sneeze. Beneath it was a great fat man who was breathing and wheezing and bound to a slab under some thin film that kept him from falling. Ricky couldn't see it, but 2 additional lost souls were bound to 2 additional slabs within the room. Ricky gaped and fell out of the moment. There are people in these rooms! Yeah, observed Beethan at the head of the group. Mal Kuthel, that's my protector. He said they gotta come out of it on their own or they're like brain dead. Kinda like you and Ed were a little bit ago. They're in a similar sort of headspace, right? Carl spoke up. You can pray for them if you like. I do internally. I also think I'm starting to recognize this area. We've crashed into the infrastructure of this thing toward the center. I've been here a bit. It's time to follow me again. And he got out his map. No argument here, fam, said Ethan from the front. At length, they managed to exit the remains of the cylinder. Even if it was smaller than the first one Ethan managed to commandeer, it was still a very large structure. It had decimated itself, though, and all that remained were the dome at the front and the spinal segment beneath which they had come through. Out the bottom of the staircase was a circular exit. The staircase really did act like a sort of spine, and it was as though they came out of the skeleton of the vessel through the spinal cord. It was at such an angle that the drop to the flesh-colored floor was only a few feet. Ricky got out last, and in the nick of time. Suddenly the remains of the cylinder began to vibrate, and seconds later it rose up and drifted slowly away, the front domed portion and the little spinal segment beneath it. In the real world, a hovering ship that crashed into an office building would have crushed cubicles, destroyed desks, knocked down ceiling tiles, broken water pipes, and left arcing electrical cables here or there as fires of varying strength either grew or subsided all around. By contrast, where the cylinder impacted the inside of the ziggurat, there was a different sort of destruction. No fires resulted, there was no electricity, no water lines were broken. There was some sort of tech infrastructure that became ruined, though. It was a kind of productive assembly line that had been impacted. Whatever materials or mechanisms were employed to produce components of ships had been laid out in sequence. They made an array that wound around the center of the structure, the great conch ziggurat. The crash definitely impeded operations. At the fringes of the destruction, motion indicated grays thrown out of their routine, whatever that was. Looking out into the open area of the ziggurat, Ethan could see the vessels continued to float, almost motionless. But they had begun moving forward slowly again, like traffic recovering after a wreck brings the whole highway to a stop. The light of the coming sunrise on the twilight horizon seemed brighter from this vantage. That was at least partially the work of the mirrors. Across the wide vertical opening, he could see the destruction they had wrought. Maybe a space 100 feet wide and 60 high at a slight angle represented where their cylinder had sparked, broke certain programming that kept it in formation, and crashed into the center of the structure. Ethan could see himself reflected across the peroxide river, only because he knew where to look. The distance was far enough. He appeared no larger than a mouse, and the entire scene was endlessly refracted throughout the structure. Carl said, "We should hurry." "What is all this?" said Ed. He was adjusting his heavy coat, transferring things between pockets, and bringing Carl's 9mm to bear. He wore his trademark orange glasses, suspenders, a yellow shirt, and dark brown pants under the coat. His hat and gloves had been lost a long time ago. He wasn't sure where. Probably when he saw that spider. "Also, hand me a box of ammo out of your bag there, will you?" Carl obliged and passed Ed cartridges, saying, "It is like a computer cloud. The women at the center, they are the primary..." Ethan, what do you call the part of the computer that does all the work? "The Central Processing Unit, or CPU. That is the term. They are networked in like a CPU and used to produce progeny mixing the... It's not DNA, it's whatever is like DNA for those light beings in the ugly colors we saw below, remember? Whatever is like DNA to them, it is mixed with women in the chamber and they gestate 9 months on average, as women do when pregnant. However, they are all in the dream state and emotions have some kind of spiritual reality. I do not understand it. This fuels their production, though. As the men produce the suits in the cylinders, the emotional pain of the women has a similar creative power that is being harnessed as energy and converted into infrastructure. The spiral fissure in this structure comes down and around from the center, going all the way to the base of this CPU, this heart chamber, where they guard the women they have stolen. Follow these assembly mechanisms, you will see their trail comes down to the chamber of exploited maternity. Where we are, I would say, I don't know, we are in the middle? "The middle?" asked Ed. Yes, what we must do is go forward to get out of the spiral. He looked at the map and some diagrams he had carefully detailed there. It is much more integrated than a traditional assembly line. It could almost be there was a crunching sound, and a piece of mirror that was reflective on one side and looked like mother of pearl on the other abruptly exploded over Ethan's shoulder. Clever Ed looked up, leaned in from a destroyed component of assembly line infrastructure on a higher plane of the conch ziggurat. Clever Ed looked up, leaning in from a destroyed component of assembly line infrastructure on a higher plane of the conch ziggurat was one of the grinners, holding a characteristically strange sonic gun. He was over 100 feet away, so he didn't have exceptional accuracy. Clever Ed returned fire instantly, causing the antagonist to duck for cover. Carl had already folded the map and pocketed it. No time to talk. Run, follow me. And he took off toward the center of the structure. Dozens of grinners would come. They could pick off some of them, maybe, but not all of them. Carl led them through a labyrinth of counterintuitive infrastructure. On the one hand, it made a certain kind of sense. It was the inhumanity of it that was uncanny. A beehive has several distinct areas. There are entry points, portions where honey is collected, portions where larvae are nursed, and the most guarded area where the queen goes about her business. Ant hills similarly have a diversity of subterranean chambers with different purposes. Termite mounds were perhaps the most similar to the structure, given the wide open chambers beneath them, cheekily called galleries by entomologists. Here was a similar conglomeration of internal design, and the greys were the worker ants or worker bees. The grinners were like the varying combative iterations of hive insect, but as with such insects, they shared collective intelligence. When one saw you, immediately the whole hive knew there was something going on. There were disconnects to that reality, though. When they defeated the inspection party that tried to retrieve them only moments ago, so also went direct surveillance to what went on in that portion of the hive. By sending the greys to green hell and stopping the grinners, they cut off the feed of the collective. So when the cylinder they commandeered went back into formation, they weren't immediately noticed. It took Ethan trying to shift and crashing to reawaken the hive. Carl's strategy was to find a natural low-traffic area and get out of sight. He knew the spiral of the hive grew gradually more constricting as it wound. Traffic toward the CPU chamber was more involved, and there would be fewer opportunities to hide. However, that direction was also where Genevieve certainly would be. Likely, it was also where Ethan's ostensible sweetheart endured the terrors of dark sleep. That central area of the complex was integrated in such a way that almost every other area of the structure in some way led back to it. Carl was headed this direction with an idea where there might be a spot that would be relatively safe. Now he had the map in his left hand and the gun in his right. Okay, hold on, stop here a bit, he said. Everybody get in there and do not touch any walls. Carl indicated a little alcove that led off a main artery but went nowhere. It looked as though there was an intention to fill it, but it wasn't yet realized, like an empty memory slot in a computer tower with little lines of gold trailing from it across a circuit board. Carl said, Clever Ed, Ricky, can you keep a cannon on that entry point? Yes, sir. Sure. Thanks. And Carl returned his gaze to the map. Ed said over his shoulder, looking out the way they'd come and keeping his weapon at the ready. If we could have got that ship out of here, you think we could have got back home? Of course. I thought we would be able to, Carl replied. But hijacking an alien ship that is half alive, as Ethan has indicated, was not part of my design. I did not know what would really happen. However, we will certainly need to acquire the use of something like that again once we find the antechamber to the heart of this place where the women on their cycle are. Ethan was looking over Carl's shoulder at the map. It really is like a computer, he said. That's why they have trouble keeping up with us. Like a computer is supposed to be used through software, the interaction between these things and humans is supposed to be in different circumstances. It's like somebody printed a three-dimensional version of a simulation avatar, shrunk him down, and threw him in the hardware of the computer tower. We are atop the hardware and impacting how it functions. Those light beings below, they use the computer. So our presence in their instrument, they are mostly unaware of it unless we break something. We're in a huge blind spot, Ethan clarified. Yep, but maybe not anymore. Wait a second, hold up, fam. Ethan stood up, grabbing his head and turning around. these things, they're all AI. It's all AI. The grays and the grinner, well, they're like when the virus takes over your computer. This is a fine way to put it, said Carl. No, but it gets deeper, Ethan said. He was getting excited. He cast a furtive glance to Ed at the door, at Ricky, then turned back to Carl. AI responds to pre-programmed protocol. There are always logic gaps. You can get it to confuse itself. Carl squinted. I'm sure you can, but how? What's the mission of this thing? These things? Well, you have to take into account the character of the devil himself, Carl replied thoughtfully. The original computer virus. It is like if you made a robot and the robot said it would be like you and better than you. This is the devil. Very like an artificial intelligence himself. So his entire aim is to supplant God. So he steals, he kills, he destroys, he demands obeisance. He has a separate agenda. It is a collectivist kind of thing. Like a neural net, but made of human beings who are all on the same operating system software and networked together. Fam, it's AI. They're turning us into servers. Okay, so ultimately the goal of such a demonic AI would be consolidation of all things into itself. Everything here is calibrated to that aim, I expect, as well as the means by which it can be accomplished and the means by which it can be secured. There is huge effort made in the Book of Revelation, global conquest, and an attempt to fight God himself. Imagine a program in a computer thinking it could have a fist fight with the programmer who designed its software and also installed its very circuitry. But that would be the aim of this being, to suck everything into itself. I think its rationale is like someone who is taken a hostage. God cannot delete the devil if he has all mankind, right? Of course, this is incorrect. A programmer always could just disassemble the computer, but he may want to extricate the files that are not totally corrupted. So, the rationale is faulty, but that is about what it looks like. No cap, fam. I think the AI stuff in the real world might be like an extension of this. This is a perfected biological computer. They're trying to get all that biotech stuff up and running, and it's coming, fam. Everybody out on the coast thinks they'll be able to shoot their brain into a hard drive and live forever. They want to make robot bodies, no cap, but it's like, you know, Blade Runner, right? Not like Star Wars metal critters, but for real, like, they think that out there. Clever Ed interrupted. So you guys just gonna chat each other up until they find us, or figure something out? Of course, Carl smiled with half of his mouth, examining the map closer. If your yeasty version works, it'll, turn everything off? It'll be like hitting reboot? Ethan asked. Probably. I wonder if we can reset that AI, Ethan muttered. The cat's like a quantum computer, but you can work with a cat. Maybe there's a similar way. Meow, someone said. That is not being very funny, Ricky observed, looking around despite himself. Ed was staring out at the stretching corridor. Meow, came the sound again. It was remote. Well, not too remote. Everybody poked their heads out the little alcove. A kitten abruptly jumped from the curved-in human wall to the left, saw them, puffed out its fur, and hissed. It maintained eye contact and dug its claws into whatever material the floor was made out of. Every man froze, eyes centered on the animal. It was calico, not black. It looked several months old and had come from literally nowhere. Carl made his way through the others and slowly walked toward the animal, chattering like a cat himself, making the noise. Another purple portal opened to a dead plain right across the corridor. The cat jumped through and the portal disappeared insultingly fast. That was not Slinky, Carl observed. What was it? Clever Ed was looking up and down the otherwise empty corridor. Carl walked up to the spot in the transparency that had been a portal while Ricky and Ed kept a gun pointed down one side of the corridor, and Ethan kept an eye on the other. Carl knocked on the wall, leaned his head against it, listened to it, and turned back, where he said, I do not. There was suddenly a sort of crazy cat war. A dozen cats came out of a dozen portals, many high up along the walls or in the ceiling. They were chasing one another, fighting with one another, and they wouldn't let a single human being get close. Then they were gone, and things were quiet again. What the hell is going on? Clever Ed said. Carl looked around, forehead wrinkling, working through something in his mind. A big fat cat came waddling through a portal and was not fast enough to get away. Ethan caught him, it was a him, and picked him up. He was corpulent, gray, muscled, and heavy. One might say he was a grade A chunk. And he did not like being caught, though he also could not do much about it, so he just sort of endured it. Everyone gathered around Ethan and the fat one with yellow eyes and short fur. Looks nothing like Sneaky. Looks nothing like Slinky, Carl remarked. Shorty? Ricky asked. Carl straightened up. He's so mysterious. Slinky escaped to that island full of cats in Japan, the one where a bunch of feral cats run around and tourists feed them, and she was in heat. She made it, Ed observed. Exactly. I'm shook, Ethan contributed. What does that mean? Carl looked at him suspiciously as he struggled to keep the cat from falling out of his arms. The animal had become jelly and was trying to use what passed for gravity in the world of strange to its advantage. Ricky spoke up. It means he's surprised. Ed crossed his arms. Well, what do we do, Carl? Set him up in front of the wall where the kitten called up a portal. They put the cat there and made a semicircle around him, facing where the portal would be, but also keeping guns on the empty corridor of the ziggurat surrounding them. The cat tried to go between legs, but he couldn't quite pull it off, and all the animal had in his feline arsenal were a few hisses and some odd waddling. Just throw him at the wall, Clever Ed demanded. No, that'll piss him off. We'll lose him like Slinky. Carl stooped and tried to pet the cat, but it did not like that and made ugly growling sounds. Who cares? We can buy time. Clever Ed grabbed the fat cat and went to throw him, but was surprised how heavy he was and didn't quite launch the animal far enough to hit the wall. Rather, he just sort of tossed him 4 or 5 feet, and the fat cat scrambled, hissing down the way they had yet to travel, beginning to jump up and down and scratching at the walls. Ed looked sheepish. Well, he's heavier than he looks. No cap, fam. That cat's a straight-up Twitch streamer. What does he mean? What does he mean, Ed? Carl looked at Ed. Ed looked at Ethan. People who make money playing video games and never leave the house. He turned back to Carl. You'd be surprised how many they are. The feline Twitch streamer hissed as it waddled down the corridor, panting, and took a left, searching desperately for another portal. Carl said, Don't let him get away. Get back here, said Ricky. They took off after the cat. However, the truth was there was no need to chase him. Another river of cats started coming in and out of the pathway randomly wherever they could find a portal. They were chasing one another. Some were young, some were older, some were just kittens. Clever Ed said, In 4 years, you can get 420,000 cats off a single breeding pair. Cat Lady went 411 in Oklahoma in the Panhandle north of town called Beaver. She had a farmhouse. We actually found her, though. Just took a while. Tripped in a hidden basement, broke her neck, and the cats ate most of her. There was a cat door. They came and went for years. Took the tax people to finally go out and bother her. That's when the missing persons report was filed. The basement was accessible 2 ways. The hidden door in a bathroom closet and through a hole in one of the walls the cats used. They overran that property. I'll never forget the smell. It's only been 16 hours. Over a year for the cat. Enough time for kittens to grow up and reproduce, a few thousand at least. Another cat cut off Carl's thought. It was Slinky. And she came through the portal with 9 kittens, all at an age where they weren't quite wall-eyed, but weren't quite weaned. She made happy sounds, ran to Carl, and immediately made figure eights around his feet, purring. Carl picked her up, and she nuzzled his head. You are back on schedule, are you? He said, and quickly produced a piece of beef jerky. Looks like you have brought your family. Is this your family, your latest family? How many kittens have you had, little one? Raoul, explained the cat, then vomited. The kittens didn't know how to deal with Carl, so he crouched down and they approached him cautiously, looking at him. Keeping a friendly expression on his face, he said, Everybody, take a bit of beef jerky and give it to a cat. Whatever quantum shenanigans this cat can do, she has passed it on. She has taught her kittens, and they had kittens, and she has kept having kittens. Must be a fine island if you are a cat. God bless America, Ed breathed. Well, the island is in Japan. Turn of phrase. I think I should explain to you now how the shift works. Why is a one-way thing and what that means, Carl said. Bang! A 9mm punctuated. Ed at the back had just nailed a grinner who came around the corner. This did indeed startle the cats, but Carl managed to catch Slinky in time, and the kittens just looked around wildly. One ran off down the hallway, but stopped soon. Carl said, Every man grab as many cats as you can. They obliged and managed to split the 9 kittens evenly. Carl had Slinky, they each had 3, and now they started to run again. Carl was taking them left, then right, then up a sloping bit of infrastructure that looked like the mouth of an alien beetle fashioned it, and down strange sloping paths. The animals made no shortage of noise. They encountered a few grays that were quickly transformed to goo, and Carl abruptly yelled, "We're almost near a good spot!" Whereupon he pulled back his arm and launched Slinky as hard as he could at the dead end ahead. Indeed, a portal opened up, and they all spilled through very quickly. They landed on a hillside of melting wet midsummer snow on a mountain limbed in green that had one of the most breathtaking views that can be found on Earth. Carl caught the cat immediately as he came through the portal, pivoted, landed on his backpack, and began sliding down the hill, looking toward the opening. They passed 50 feet. He stopped himself. The others had done the same. He put the cat down, said, "Keep your guns on the portal till she pukes," and everyone obliged. Slinky quickly vomited, then demonstrated her anger to Carl with some choice feline expletives, but he managed to calm her down, especially as Ricky, Ethan, and Clever Ed returned her the kittens. In the world between worlds, a dozen dark-eyed grinners found the hallway seconds after the portal closed and immediately communicated this information to those that slaved their minds. Carl and crew had successfully transferred localities and for the moment had the advantage of time. But this set of circumstances would not last long. The cats were oblivious to it all and only seemed interested in what treats Carl could provide. Many rounds of beef jerky were distributed, actually voiding the bag Carl had been withdrawing from in his back pocket. He reached in his pack and opened a whole new bag, which interested Slinky and all her kittens greatly. They tore into it, and it was also gone in seconds. Clever Ed looked quite tired as he said, "Where are we?" Carl crouched down, grinning, scratching his cat behind the ears. "We are near Banff, Canada." His linguistic tick had returned in the real world. "It is summer, near elite meeting point. They choose finest places, then destroy them. Portals are always near such places." "Can't these damn cats portal hop to a beach?" Carl laughed without much humor. "I hear you. It must be 2023, wondered Ricky. Ethan yawned. "I could sleep in the snow," he said, and leaned into the hillside. "Not just yet." "Not just yet," Carl barked. "We are 3 miles up the hill from tourist Banff. We make camp here or head there, but we just fall asleep. This is not good." Clever Ed yawned and shook his head. "I feel like I'm going to fall asleep standing up." "That is the other world. Here, entropy returns. We are going to be hungry," Carl yawned. "We might need to hunt game, but we build the fire first." "Whatever, fair. That brush ought to do." And Ed stumbled to the tree line where he began to gather sticks. With all four pitching in, they had a little fire going inside the stone boundaries of an improvised fire pit very quickly, and a small supply of wood to feed it. They chose a relatively flat area, dry of snow, and some distance into trees, then cleared away the underbrush. All told, it took 4 men about 10 minutes to get everything done. It was hardly 60 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale, and every man was cold. They got as near the fire as they could before quickly drifting into a deep sleep. Slinky curled up next to Carl, and her kittens followed suit, similarly tired after the transition. It was the middle of the day.